Welcome again, and let's take a few minutes to once again settle down our mind. So get into a comfortable position with your body. And let your mind settle down in the present. Let go of any thoughts there may be in your mind left over from things you did earlier or any time in the past, as well as thoughts about what you're going to do later, today, tomorrow, any time in the future. So put aside all those other thoughts for now and just be right here in the present moment, present place. And remember the positive altruistic intention you generated earlier during the meditation. Bring that back up in your mind and make it your motivation for being here now, participating in this talk. Okay, so last week I started explaining the 4 establishments of mindfulness. This is a practice that's found in all the traditions of Buddhism, and it was taught by the Buddha as a way to develop insight or wisdom into the way that things actually exist, which is different than the way we usually see things. So, for example, the Buddha taught that all conditioned phenomena, meaning all the things that arise from causes and conditions, like our body and all the material things in the world around us, and also our mind and all the different parts of our mind, our thoughts and experiences and so on. So all of these things are conditioned phenomena because they depend on causes and conditions for their existence. They can't exist independently of causes and conditions. So the Buddha taught that all of these things are impermanent, meaning that they change moment by moment. Even in the tiniest moment of time, they are changing. They don't remain the same. So that's the reality of things. And it's not because the Buddha said so. It's just the way things are. It's confirmed by modern science as well. So even though that's the way things are, that's not the way we see things. So we tend to see things as if they don't change, as if they stay the same. And we may even have this sense that things are going to be there forever. Not that we do this deliberately or consciously. Of course, if we're asked, we'll say, well, yeah, that chair or that table, of course, they're going to go out of existence at some point in time. They're not going to last forever. That's on our intellectual level, but on our kind of feeling level, gut level, we do tend to feel as if it's always going to be there. It's never going to go away. It's never going to be destroyed or disappear. So it's kind of our gut level, emotional level of feeling that we tend to see things as permanent rather than impermanent. And so this is like a mistaken way of seeing things. And this mistaken way of seeing things often leads to emotions, afflictive emotions, disturbing emotions. The main one is attachment. So we tend to get very attached to the people and the things that we like, that we find attractive and pleasant and make us feel good, make us feel happy, give us the pleasure we're looking for. And so when we have attachment, we want those things to be there, to never go away, never disappear, and never change. We want some kind of stability in the presence of those people and objects so that we can enjoy them, we can continue having that pleasure. And so this is quite unrealistic because these things are not going to last forever. People die, and even before they die, they may go away, or they may change in a very big way, such that we can hardly recognize them anymore. Or our relationship with them may change, and we can no longer get along with them as we did before. And our possessions, the material things, and there's no guarantee that they will always be there. Something could happen to them. So when things do change, when we lose them, die or disappear, or they're destroyed or whatever, we can then feel a lot of sadness, a lot of grief. So attachment usually leads to unpleasant experiences, suffering, sorrow, when changes do happen. Also, people often become anxious and frightened, worried that they may experience loss, the things that they cherish and are attached to might change or might go away, and so they often are in this state of anxiety about that. And people also sometimes get angry when changes do happen, unwanted changes, of course. They can even become angry and violent and do negative things, harmful things. So these are just some examples of disturbing emotions that can arise due to not seeing things as impermanent, which is what they are, and instead seeing them as permanent or wanting them to be permanent. It's like wishful thinking. And so these disturbing emotions immediately make our mind disturbed, unpeaceful, unhappy. And they can also motivate our actions so that we do actions that create even more suffering, even more problems, both for ourselves and others. And in a longer term sense, these disturbing emotions and the karma we create, the actions we do motivated by them, perpetuate our existence in samsara, unenlightened, suffering existence. And so it's very important that we clear up these misconceptions about the way things exist and come to see things as they are. And with a more realistic way of seeing things, we'll not be so disturbed by these delusions, these painful emotions. We'll act more wisely and skillfully. And eventually, we can become completely free. So the Buddha taught a way to be free from all these problems that are based on seeing things incorrectly. And this mainly involves seeing things correctly, learning to see things as they are. And so this practice of the 4 establishments of mindfulness that we're looking at in this Wednesday class is one such way to correct our mistaken ways of seeing things and come to see things in a correct way as they are. So the 4 establishments of mindfulness are training in mindfulness with regard to 4 objects: the body, feelings, the mind, and all phenomena. So we start with the body, And we started looking at this already last week. And in the book that you have on page 41, that's where this section on the 4 foundations or 4 establishments starts. And down at the bottom of page 41, the second paragraph from the bottom, it says the Satipatthana Sutra, that's the sutra the Buddha taught, explaining these 4 establishments of mindfulness. It explains several practices for establishing mindfulness of the body, breathing, postures and actions, 32 parts of the body, the 4 elements, and the result of the body, becoming a corpse. And so I don't know if we'll have time to do all of those, but we'll try to go through them, starting with the breath. And when you hear about the last one, the corpse, you might think, what? Meditating on a corpse? So yeah, some people probably feel squeamish about that and uncomfortable about that. But then I was thinking, Halloween is coming up in a few weeks. And I think people in Israel know about Halloween. So that's a time when people sometimes dress up like skeletons and zombies and witches and scary things and have fun. And I don't know, here in America, people decorate their houses outside in the yard, and also inside of the house they put these kind of objects. So we're kind of used to skeletons and zombies and things like that. So we shouldn't be so uncomfortable. I mean, I guess the difficulty is thinking about your body turning into a corpse, turning into a skeleton. That's quite challenging. But it does have a purpose. It does have a reason. It's to get us to really be realistic about the fact that our body is not going to stay the way it is now forever, a warm, living body. But at some point in time, the life will go out of our body and it will turn into a corpse. So that's very powerful to get a sense of impermanence and also unsatisfactoriness, that because our body is not going to last forever, we can't derive constant, lasting happiness and pleasure in relation to our body. So it's better to realize that and not have unrealistic expectations. Then, so we're going to do some meditation to get more experience of this kind of practice. But first, I'd like to call your attention to the next paragraph in your book. It mentions 4 qualities of mind that we should have while we practice the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So these were mentioned by the Buddha in the sutra, the Satipatthana Sutra. And I've actually extracted this material from Joseph Goldstein's book called Mindfulness. That's what JG stands for, Joseph Goldstein. He's a long-term, very experienced practitioner of mindfulness and a teacher and author as well. So he has a very nice book about these 4 foundations of mindfulness. So the first of these 4 qualities is ardency. And you might have trouble with that word. Even in English, it's not a very common word. It means being serious, being enthusiastic, being zealous about something. Diligence could be another way of translating it. So Joseph Goldstein says, it's a balanced and sustained application of effort. He also says it's a warmth of feeling, a passionate and strong enthusiasm or devotion, because we realize the value and importance of something. When the Buddha speaks of abiding ardently, he's urging us to take great care with continuity and perseverance in what we do. So it's enthusiasm. Maybe that would be a good word, enthusiasm and energy and a strong wish to do this practice. And this comes from seeing clearly the benefit, the value of doing this practice. And Joseph recommends contemplating 3 things that can help us generate this quality of mind. First is impermanence. First one is the preciousness of the Dharma, right? So if we can really see the value of the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings, and how by learning the Dharma and practicing the Dharma, this is the source of all happiness, of all goodness, all good qualities, and also higher states of mind all the way up to enlightenment. And so the more we learn the Dharma, practice it, gain appreciation of it, the more we will value the Dharma, and that in turn will give us this enthusiasm to want to engage in it, such as this practice of the 4 establishments. And also how rare it is. So it's also very rare, very unusual to be able to encounter the Dharma, even though for us maybe it was very easy. But if you look around the world, most people in the world don't have interest in the Dharma or don't have access to the Dharma, don't even know about the Dharma. And so we're very fortunate that we do have this chance to learn it. The second contemplation that can help us appreciate and have enthusiasm for the practice of mindfulness is impermanence. So this refers to the transient nature of things, our body, possessions, people, enjoyments, life, everything in our life basically is impermanent. And if we don't understand impermanence, then we may spend all of our time and energy running after just pleasures and enjoyments and material possessions of this life, which is probably what most people in the world are doing. And with an understanding of impermanence, we can recognize that these kind of pursuits are like building castles in the sand. They're just going to get washed away, and we'll end up with disappointment. So for some people that may take time to understand, but one thing that can be helpful is just to look at the examples of others who may have spent their life running after material wealth and fame and popularity and worldly achievements, winning a gold medal in the Olympics or whatever. But then all of that comes to an end. The person's life comes to an end and all of those things are left behind. So they may bring some temporary satisfaction and happiness and sense of achievement, but it's always short term. It has to be left behind when we die. So contemplating impermanence, and especially death, the fact that we're going to die one day and leave everything behind, that can really help us to have more of a sense of appreciation for the Dharma and the practice of Dharma and want to put more energy into that. And the third contemplation that he recommends is karma, which is that all of the actions that we do bring results, bring consequences, which we will have to experience. And the kind of consequences that we will experience depend on our motivation. So if we do actions motivated by greed, by hatred, by ignorance, or other afflictive emotions, then the result of those actions will be unpleasant, will be painful. Whereas those actions that we do motivated by the opposite states of mind, non-greed, non-hatred, non-ignorance, and on top of that, positive states of mind such as compassion, love, wisdom, generosity, and so on, then those kind of actions are the source of happiness and real satisfaction and well-being and peace. So I thought we could do another meditation on the breath as we started to do last week. But we'll start with short contemplations on these points recommended by Joseph Goldstein to see if this can help us get a sense of ardency or enthusiasm for doing the practice. So make yourselves comfortable. So comfortable doesn't mean slouching, letting your body kind of droop or slouch. So it's always good to try to sit up straight, keeping your back straight, because that helps the mind to be more awake, alert, concentrated. It's also important to try to be relaxed as much as possible. So if you notice any tension anywhere in your body, see if you can let it go. Imagine it melting, flowing out of you, sinking into the earth, or just evaporating, disappearing in space. And really make the determination to do the best you can to keep your mind focused on the meditation. And even if other thoughts pop up in your mind, things you have to do later, things you're worried about, concerned about, problems you're trying to solve. So those things might be important, but decide not to pay attention to them now. You can always give them attention later. So try to have a sense that the time we have for meditation is quite precious. And if we really want to get the most out of our practice of meditation, we need to do it well, with concentration, with commitment, staying on the meditation and putting aside other things. So let's contemplate those 3 points mentioned by Joseph Goldstein to see if that can boost our enthusiasm for doing this practice of mindfulness, establishments of mindfulness. So the first one he mentioned is the preciousness of the Dharma. So just check to see if you do have a sense of how the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, are really precious, really valuable, a source of happiness and good and higher states of mind. And try to have a sense of how fortunate you are that you have the chance to learn them and practice them. And the second point he recommends is impermanence, the changing nature of all the things in our life, our body, our mind, our relationships, our possessions, our work, all of these things are subject to change. They are changing. And sooner or later, at some point, it will all come to an end. This life will come to an end, and we'll leave this life and everything behind us. And just the mind will go off to the next life. So given that reality, that truth of things, does it make sense to spend all our time and energy just on the things of this life, building up our possessions, our property, our relationships, our enjoyments, our experiences, and not put attention to what will benefit us in the future beyond this life? So that is not to say we should neglect taking care of our body and our family and our work and so forth. We do need to fulfill our responsibilities and take care of all of these things. But it's also important to spend some of our time, put some of our time and energy into working on our mind, bringing about a transformation of our mind, because that's the only thing that's really going to last beyond this life. So this practice of the establishments of mindfulness is one practice that will benefit us beyond just this life. And then the third contemplation he recommends is that of karma. So that just means the actions that we do with our body, with our speech, with our mind. All of our actions will bring consequences. They're not like happening in a void, in a vacuum, with no results coming afterwards. But there will be consequences we ourselves will experience. They can also be consequences that others experience. But karma mainly has to do with ourselves. The actions we do leave imprints on our mind. These imprints will stay in our mind. And unless they're counteracted, wasn't a good word. Unless we do things to counteract them, purify them, for example, they will bring results, sometimes painful results if the actions were unwise or unskillful. So that means we are responsible. We are the creators of our own future experiences, depending on the actions we do. So acting unwisely, unskillfully with attachment, anger, greed, jealousy, and so on will bring suffering and problems in the future. Acting with compassion, love, wisdom, positive intentions will bring benefit, peace, happiness in the future. So if that makes sense to you, then this practice of the 4 foundations of mindfulness is a practice that will help us to act more wisely and skillfully and ensure that the karma we create will be positive karma, good karma, virtuous karma, the cause of happiness and benefit in the long term. So with those contemplations as a prelude to prepare our mind for meditation, then let's engage in the practice of mindfulness with regard to the breathing. So mindfulness with regard to the breath means remembering the breath, keeping the mind on the breath. That's a familiar object. Not forgetting it, not letting the mind be distracted to other things. So when we are able to keep our mind on the breath, that means that mindfulness is present. Mindfulness is there, it's functioning, it's doing its job. When we get distracted from the breath, start thinking about other things, doing other things with our mind, with our attention, that means we have lost our mindfulness. Our mindfulness has collapsed. But we can renew it. Once we notice our mind has wandered away, then we can bring our attention back to the breath, and that way we renew mindfulness on the breath. So just try to stay focused on the breath as much as you can, being aware of each full inhalation of the breath and each full exhalation of the breath. One breath after another. And anytime the mind forgets the breath and gets distracted to something else, as soon as you notice that, let go of the other object and return to the breath. Focus the mind again on the breath. So continue doing the practice, focusing on your breathing. But now let's incorporate the next part of the instructions that were given by the Buddha in the Sutra on mindfulness. And this is to be aware if the breath is long or short. So the sutra says, talking about a practitioner, breathing in long, one knows, I am breathing in long. Breathing out long, one knows, I am breathing out long. Breathing in short, one knows, I am breathing in short. Breathing out short, one knows, I am breathing out short. So this doesn't mean that we should control our breath and try to make it long or short. We just allow the breath to be natural, allow the body to breathe as it naturally does, as it needs to. And sometimes the body needs to breathe in a longer, deeper way, so the breath is longer. And sometimes the breath is shorter. It's just according to our body, what our body needs, how much air it needs to take in. So just allow the body to breathe as it needs to. Don't interfere with it, but see if you can notice when the breath is longer and when the breath is shorter. And you don't need to analyze this, but just have simple awareness. And so again, when our mind is on the breath, paying attention to the breath for periods of time that may last just a few seconds or longer before it wanders away and gets distracted. So at those times when our mind is on the breath, at those times mindfulness is present. It's mindfulness, the mental factor of mindfulness, that is active, keeping our mind on the breath, remembering the breath, not forgetting the breath, not letting the mind get distracted elsewhere. But then when our mindfulness degenerates or collapses and our mind wanders elsewhere, that means we've lost mindfulness. But we can always renew it, bring our mind back to the breath, and then just try to keep it there as long as possible. So mindfulness then is a very, very important mental factor in this practice, to be able to keep our mind on the object, not wandering elsewhere. And then another very important mental factor in this practice is called introspective alertness, sometimes called vigilance. And I think I'll use that word because it's shorter and easier to say. And I started explaining it last week. It's sometimes compared to a spy, but not in a negative way. You know, don't think of a spy who's spying on the enemy and telling secrets about the enemy, but maybe better think of a guard or a sentry, like a guard in the bank or a sentry on the fort who's keeping an eye out in order to protect the bank or to protect the fort from danger, from harm. So that's the job, the function of this particular mental factor. So it watches, it observes, pays attention to what's happening, both in our mind but also in our body. And it is what can detect when our mind has wandered away, gotten distracted, so we're no longer paying attention to the breath or whatever our object of meditation is. So it's this mental factor, vigilance or introspective alertness, that knows our mind has wandered away, that recognizes that and is able to reactivate the mindfulness and bring our mind back to our object. But it also operates in other areas as well. It can notice if our mind is in a positive state or a negative state. So sometimes our mind will just start thinking in a negative way, being angry, being critical, having thoughts of doing something unwise or unskillful. So sometimes our mind will just start going in that direction. And at some point we recognize, oh, this isn't a healthy state of mind, this isn't a skillful state of mind, this isn't right. So that's introspective alertness or vigilance. That's detecting. It's almost like an alarm is going off. It's detecting this unskillful, unwise activity going on in our mind and saying, no, that's not good. I shouldn't be doing that. And bringing our mind back to something more positive or constructive. But it also notices when our mind is in a good state. So sometimes our thoughts will just be really positive and constructive and beneficial. And when we're aware of that, we can appreciate that, then that's also vigilance or introspective alertness. So it doesn't only notice negative things, but it notices positive things as well. And also neutral things. So they also talk about this mental factor in the sense of what our body is doing. So it's just noticing what our body is doing, what our hands are doing, what our arms are doing, what our legs are doing, what our eyes are doing, and so on, what our mouth is doing. So it's just awareness, like self-awareness of what our body is doing, as well as what our mind is doing. And in the practice of Dharma, we need to train this mental factor so that it knows what kind of actions of our body and our mind are positive and constructive and things we should be doing, and which kinds of actions of our body and our mind and our speech are unwise, unskillful, destructive, and we should avoid doing. So then this mental factor kind of keeps us in line. It's able to keep us going in the right direction, treading the right path, not going down wrong paths. Because that way we avoid suffering and we have more happiness. And so if you look at your book again, on the very bottom of page 41, the very last line, it mentions the second of the 4 qualities that we are advised to have when we practice mindfulness, the establishments of mindfulness. And there it's translated as clear comprehension. So in the Pali tradition, that's the term that they use, clear comprehension. But it seems that the Pali term for this and the Sanskrit term for this are almost identical. So it does seem to be the same mental factor, but just translated in different ways. And so the way it's explained in Joseph Goldstein's book, he calls it clear knowing or clear comprehension. We call it introspection or vigilance, but just different names for the same thing. And he says this is knowing what is happening, knowing what we are doing and why we are doing it. What is our motivation? What is driving us? And so in Joseph Goldstein's book, he says, it is the ability to clearly comprehend what is taking place, and it comprises the investigation and wisdom aspects associated with mindfulness. So the practice of mindfulness, like these 4 foundations or 4 establishments of mindfulness, is not a practice that just involves observing what's happening in a kind of passive way, but the whole purpose of doing this practice is to investigate, to look more carefully at the objects of our meditation, like in this case the body, so that we can understand the body, so we can have a correct understanding of the body. And instead of thinking our body is permanent and unchanging, we come to see that it's impermanent, changing all the time, every minute, every second. So we come to see that by paying very close attention to our body. And the same with the other 4 objects, feelings, and so forth. And then there are other things that we need to understand about our body. The fact that it's not as wonderful and satisfying as we often think it is. It's actually unsatisfactory, full of suffering, full of problems. And that will help us to have less attachment to our body, less clinging to our body, less identification with our body, and then less disappointment when the body does change and does end up having suffering, like aging and sickness and so forth. So we'll more easily accept those changes that come in life rather than being upset, depressed, and so forth. So this mental factor of introspective alertness or vigilance, I think it's probably already there. We already do have it to a certain extent. It's just when we are aware of what our body is doing, movements of our body, the postures of our body, and so forth. And it's also when we have awareness of our mind, what kind of thoughts we have, what kind of feelings we have, what kind of motivations we have for the things that we do, and so on. So I think everyone does have that to a certain extent, but we need to cultivate it even more, even further. And how to do that, how to cultivate introspective alertness. So that's something I wondered about. But I did find one answer when I was doing a retreat on calm abiding, studying the materials on calm abiding, because in the practice of calm abiding, it's also considered very, very important to know whether our mind is focused on the object or doing something else. And if there's other kind of faults or obstacles to concentration, vigilance or introspective alertness notices those so that we can apply antidotes to them. So it's a very important aspect of the practice of calm abiding. And so what is said in the teachings on calm abiding is that the way to cultivate, to have more of this mental factor, vigilance or introspective alertness, is by having more mindfulness. And so, so it said that if we have strong mindfulness, like we sit down to do meditation and focus our mind on our object, whatever our object may be, breath or image of the Buddha or whatever we are meditating on, focusing on. So we have mindfulness, remembering our object, not forgetting our object. And when we have strong mindfulness, then vigilance or introspective alertness will arise naturally, automatically. Because if we do have this strong intention to stay focused on our object, then when we're not focused on our object, when we lose our object, get distracted to something else, or we start to fall asleep, then this factor of vigilance or introspective alertness will notice that, just like the guard or the sentry in the bank or in the fort, will notice, something is wrong there, something's going on that shouldn't be happening. So it just kicks in. So that's probably the most important way to cultivate and have more of this mental factor of vigilance. So we've got a few more minutes left, so let's try another short few minutes of meditation on the breath and see if we can notice this mental factor of vigilance or introspective alertness. And it comes about again when we have strong mindfulness. So put your attention on your breath. And really try to keep your attention, your awareness on the breath. Try to have strong mindfulness, remembering the breath, not forgetting the breath. And again, when our mindfulness is there and is strong, then that will activate vigilance, introspective alertness, which is like the guard to ensure that our mind is on the breath or has wandered off to some other object. So again, anytime you become aware that your mind has wandered away from the breath to something else, so that is vigilance. It shows that you do have vigilance or introspective alertness that recognizes your mind has been distracted. And then that can reactivate the mindfulness, bring the mind back to the object. So we've come to the end of our time, and we'll make a mental dedication of the positive energy we generated during this session of learning and thinking and meditating. We did this with an altruistic intention, a wish to benefit others. So let's share this positive energy with others, other people, other beings, all beings, if you're comfortable thinking in that way. May it be cause for all beings to find the path that leads to genuine peace and happiness and freedom from all suffering and its causes, and the attainment of the perfect peace of liberation and enlightenment. Okay, so thank you. And next week we'll do more meditation. I ended up talking too much today, so I wanted to give the instructions, but next week we'll have more time to practice the instructions and get used to them. So thank you.